You're listening to the Heart Lessons Podcast with me, Sarah Rieke. Real women, real stories, real faith. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and I'm so glad to have you joining me here today. Today, you are listening to episode number 64 of the podcast, which is the Ask Us Anything episode, where I partnered up with Colonna and Kristin Hernandez of Through the Lens podcast, and we answered some of the questions that you guys submitted. The Ask Us Anything questions that you guys submitted with regard to pregnancy and infant loss awareness. If you've been with the podcast, if you've been sticking with us and following throughout this month, you know that our heart focus has been pregnancy and infant loss awareness. And so last week, I did a Facebook Live video with Holly and Kristin of Through the Lens podcast, and we addressed some of the questions that you guys asked earlier in the month, either to help you walk through your grief journey or to know how to help someone else walk through their grief journey. And so that's what this episode is about today. It's the audio of that Facebook Live video that we did last week. So if you missed the video, I'm so glad that you'll be able to still hear the great content that we shared. If you aren't familiar with Holly or Kristin, they co-host Through the Lens podcast, which is a gospel-centered conversation on hope in the heartache. And it is a wonderful podcast if you are going through a season of suffering. I would highly recommend it. You can find it on iTunes or really anywhere that podcasts are found. And Holly shared her story on the podcast back in episode number 13. That was a long time ago. And Kristin shared her episode just a few weeks ago, I think it was 61. But it was just earlier this month. So if you want to hear more details about their individual stories, you can go back to listen to those episodes. But today's episode is going to be focused on the questions that you guys submitted. And so I hope that if you submitted a question that you will be able to find it and be encouraged in what you hear. And so I just want to let you know that as we receive these questions, we noticed that they kind of fell into two different camps. One was how to deal with anxiety of pregnancy after loss. And the other half was basically how to deal with others, how to deal with and relate with others in your loss. And so the first half of this episode is going to address the pregnancy after loss questions, and the second half is going to address the dealing with others questions. So if you asked a question in one of those two categories, I guess especially the second one, just to let you know that if you wanted to jump to the second half, that's where we'll be addressing the how to handle others in your grief questions. Well, it was such a privilege and so fun to do this video with these lovely ladies. I have so much respect for them and for what they do for other lost mamas, and I just think they're great. And I was just so happy to be able to partner with them. And I'm so happy to present to you the Ask Us Anything episode with Holly and Kristin and myself. So here it is. Okay, Josh is telling me to do another intro. So hello, this is another intro.
Yes.
Since we're going to use this on our podcast in a couple weeks, I'll just say hello and welcome to the Through the Lens and Heart Lessons podcast joint live Facebook video where we will hopefully encourage you, those of you who have experienced infant loss.
Podcast in a couple weeks.
And I just heard myself. That was strange.
Technology.
I know. I'm so sorry. So here we are, hopefully to encourage you and just answer some questions that you might have. And just, I know when you're going through loss, the thing that you want is to feel like you're not alone. So that's what we're here for, I think, is what this is all about. So if you aren't familiar with who I am, my name is Sarah Rieke. I host the Heart Lessons podcast, and it is not grief related necessarily, but since I personally have lost infants, it is something that comes up frequently on the podcast. And so my experience is that I lost two full-term babies that they were born at 37 weeks. My daughter in 2012 and son in 2015. And I also have 3 living children. So the babies I lost would fit in between. So I have a 7, 4, and 1-year-old. And I get to stay home with them. But I'm starting to be okay saying that I'm a part-time work-from-home mom. because the podcast and a lot of things take up some time. So, and Holly's husband, Billy, and I actually went to youth group together. Her in-laws, I know her in-laws. And so I knew of Holly, but it wasn't until, I think it was Benjamin's memorial service that we actually met for the first time. Yeah. So Holly, but it wasn't until I think it was Benjamin. So so that's how I know Holly, and then I met Kristin through Holly, and so we have been internet friends for the last year or so. So that's been fun.
And it's exciting that Sarah and I actually live just one city apart from each other. So that's why we actually get to do this in person. Although Kristin, of course, is 2 time zones away from us.
Over here by myself.
Again, technology.
I know, it's still cool that we get to do it, I think. And thanks for coming right after work, Kristin.
Oh, no problem. I'm so glad that all of the traffic lights and everything worked perfectly for me to get here just in time to join you guys.
Oh, it's so good. All right, Holly, do you want to give a little snapshot of yourself, and then we'll move on to Kristin?
Sure. So again, I'm Holly Colonna. I live in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm married to Billy, my high school sweetheart, who again knows Sarah and her family just through church history. So we live in Norfolk. We have 2 living children at home right now, Chase and Gemma, who are 2-year-old, just turned 2-year-old twins that we have living at home with us. My loss history includes I carried twins back in 2014 that I actually miscarried when I was about 10 weeks along. I lost those identical twins, and I then went on to carry my son Benjamin, who actually wound up losing after he, full-term pregnancy, was born and lived to be 10 weeks of age, and he lived his entire life in a very specialized ICU, the cardiac intensive care unit, up at a very special children's hospital in Philadelphia, and we lost him after a very difficult medical battle, and kind of born out of that experience is how Sarah and then also Kristin and myself really connected. And Kristin and I, we decided that, you know what, we kind of just been talking a lot about just processing our grief through the loss of our sons together. And we decided, if we're talking about these things, digging into these things together, grief as it relates to just the gospel and the hope that we have for just the restoration to come, but also just mourning the brokenness that comes along with just living in a broken world. We decided, you know what, let's go ahead and bring other people into this conversation. Let's start a podcast, because we know we had people kind of coming to us wanting to process. We wanted to process with other people. So, and again, Sarah had been just a great friend of ours, having a podcast of her own. So she kind of paved the way, I say, for us, even though our podcasts have slightly different focuses, but still out of the same vein of just encouraging people through the hope of the gospel. And ours, I would say, ours being called through the lens, we do look at mainly, I would say most of our episodes are very specifically child loss focused, unlike Sarah's, which kind of spans a broader range of topics. Ours is more specifically child loss. But we just really, it sounds funny to say we've enjoyed it, because it's not, it's a difficult thing and it's heavy topics, but it's been a great joy to be able to do that together, for Kristin and myself. So I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself. So Kristin, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Kristin Hernandez. I am tuning in today via phone, thanks to technology and a little bit of hiccups along the way to get here. But I am over on the Pacific time zone right now, so it's funny, I'm looking at you guys and it's dark there.
That's funny.
Here it is still bright light outside. But I am a mama to 6 babies, 5 of which have passed away, and 1 who is here sitting in front of me. I'm trying to keep him occupied while we're chatting, my little Andrew. But before we had Andrew this past April, my husband and I lost 5 babies. Our son Ethan was our first. He was born in August 2015, and he passed away just 93 minutes after he was born due to a fatal birth defect that he was born with. Just a really hard pregnancy. We had an idea that we were looking at possibly a fatal diagnosis from about halfway through that pregnancy. And then we had 3 miscarriages after. The math may not seem to add up, but it's because one of those pregnancies was a twin pregnancy. So 3 miscarriages, but 4 babies to miscarriage between Ethan and Andrew. And then this past April, my husband and I had our son Andrew, and he just turned 6 months old on Sunday. And we're just enjoying this stage with him. A little bit more about me. I work at a school district during the day. That's what I just got home from. And I like to run and spend time outside and just spend time with family. And just love getting to connect with just women in not only the infant loss community, but just in general. And I just love how we can all bring our different stories and experiences, regardless of what those have been, and encourage one another. And I love the podcast medium, and also just social media. I know social media gets a lot of flack from people, and I think for some real reasons, but I think also it has paved the way for these sorts of connections, and I think that is just awesome. So I'm just so glad I can be here with all of you, so much so that it is worth missing the first game of the Dodgers being in the World Series tonight.
Well, we thank you for your sacrifice, Kristin.
Oh, it is well worth sacrifice to be with all of you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I would agree with what you said about the internet and social media. Like, it does get a bad rap, but without it, like, we wouldn't know you, and I would know a lot of other wonderful women who have supported me and who I've been able to reach as well. So it's a blessing. Okay, so as we were looking at the questions that you guys submitted to us, we noticed that they were kind of 2 different camps mainly. And so we're going to kind of divide the questions in those 2 categories and address them accordingly. And the 2 main categories were pregnancy after loss, and also how to deal with other people in your loss. So we're going to take the pregnancy side first, and then we'll do with the others. But those were kind of the main categories that everything fell in. And so, we'll just jump in with questions relating to pregnancy after loss. Just another thing to note is that we're going to keep the names anonymous. We weren't sure. I guess we didn't ask anybody if they wanted us to use their names, so we're just going to play it safe and not use names, but we'll address the questions nonetheless. So, all right, so how do we handle fear and or anxiety during a rainbow pregnancy? Holly.
Yeah, so I was reading through a lot of the questions that we got pertaining to anxiety during pregnancy after loss. And, a lot of the questions that came through, which I completely understand because, we've all had to live this out, is really how to handle anxiety. We got asked a lot, how do you deal with this anxiety over, carrying a baby after having lost one or lost multiple losses even. And really, I think the reality is, and that we really have to just kind of embrace it and start to try to accept, is that we can't handle our anxiety. We can't deal with it. We definitely can't do it, at least on our own or out of our own strength. It's definitely something that we need the Holy Spirit's, not even help. We need the power of the Holy Spirit to be able to even begin to come to grips with our anxiety and kind of be able to sit in there a little bit, just kind of sit in there and accept it for what it is. And just knowing that with that anxiety, we are called to just daily surrender. That's what our God calls us to, is complete and total dependence on Him, and just seeking His help through way of the Holy Spirit to just navigate through anxiety during pregnancy after loss. And I think if we can just admit and even really embrace that thankfully, it's not our burden to manage our anxiety. We can't do it. And if we try, we're just gonna burn out and fall short and potentially become even more anxious as a result. It kind of perpetuates itself. So also just a thought, a book that I would recommend, if you're someone who really is battling anxiety, whether it's related to pregnancy after loss or just otherwise in general, is by Paul Miller, and it's a book called A Praying Life. And something that really stuck out to me from that book is the author talks a lot about how, anxiety, of course, is it's not from God. It's from the enemy, and we know that. But the cool thing about God is knowing that he works all things together for our good and his glory, is that God can use anxiety as an avenue by which we can grow into deeper dependence on him. So he takes this thing from the enemy and he turns it into something that actually draws us into deeper relationship with him. And I think if we can just kind of lean into that, and I know that sounds a little bit abstract, so I'll give you a personal way for me that has been helpful. And it's through just community with other believers, being able to just talk through, invite other people into discussion, invite other people into just prayer, covering, me in prayer, in particular during my pregnancy after losses. And knowing that, people aren't going to be able to fully meet our needs, but that we can invite other people into the journey to help us as we lean on the Spirit for his help. So, and final thing I would say is just a reminder, as we carry children after loss, that, we're stewards, and, we're not their creators, we're not their saviors. That's God's job to be sovereign, and, we're called to steward. And I think that helps just kind of, that was really freeing, and is currently still really freeing for me to know that it's not my responsibility to be their God. It's my responsibility to steward them well, and the rest is truly up to God. So just kind of handing that over and surrender to him. So anything, Kristin, or Sarah, that you guys would add to that?
Yeah, I love what you said, Holly, about how anxiety can actually be a catalyst to draw us into deeper dependence on Christ. And I think, anxiety, it's like fear in itself is not something that we would think of it as from God, but I think he can use those things that come from the brokenness in the world to draw us to him and to cause us to rely on him. And I think that can be such a beautiful thing it is such a beautiful thing for those of us who, are given the gift of being able to steward a pregnancy after loss, that it is a sweet thing to have to rely on Christ for every single moment and every single day. And I think we need to do that even if we've never gone through anything hard. But I think going through something hard opens our eyes to that, and it helps us enter into that right posture of where we should be, even if we had never gone through the hard things. So I think that is just such an encouragement. And I think it is helpful to know that, we can't do it on our own. Like you said, it's not our job to just handle it. And I think in our society, it is the popular thing to be strong and just to handle it. But that's not necessarily on us to have to do. And, just that reminder, we've talked about this a little recently, just relying on Christ to be our sufficiency for each day, to give us our daily bread, no more, no less, to just give us exactly what we need, and to know that daily surrender, I think, is just so powerful, and also just draws us so close to the heart of the Father. And I think that being in that daily surrender is, the best place to be in order to help us, cope, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. What does that look like on a practical level, though? Like you're saying, you say daily surrender, but walk me through a scenario where you are coming up with an anxious thought about, inevitably when you're pregnant with a rainbow baby, you're thinking, what if this baby passes away too? How does that daily surrender work in your mind and in your heart?
Yeah, I think it goes back to taking every thought captive. I think as soon as those thoughts enter our mind, it's really important for us to, it's easy to say, hey, we need to surrender those thoughts. It's how do we do that? Because it's hard. You're just crippled with fear. And I think acknowledging it is a really good step, bringing it before God and telling him, I have this fear, identifying it to him and talking to him about it. I think that's a great step in making those daily choices. And then, again, this is much easier said than done, but choosing to trust him and to trust that he's good and to trust that he has it. And just to know that, we're not in control. Not only do we not need to be in control, but the reality is that even when things are going well, it's not due to what we're doing. We're not in control. And I think that perspective, while it may sound scary to be out of control, I think in a lot of ways it's quite comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And I think, what you guys both said is amazing. But I think what I just want to add is that it's this waiting place. Like, so if you're pregnant with your rainbow baby, it is a really tension-filled place to be. And there is really no escaping that. I think what we want to hear is a magic formula to get the anxiety to go away. And I'm sorry to say it's just not going to happen, because what we're really waiting for is like the other side of that pregnancy. We're waiting to see that healthy baby in our arms. And of course, like, you know, it takes 9 months, so you're not going to get that. It's so hard. And I think my most anxiety-filled pregnancy was with Silas, which is my youngest, who is going to be 2 in about 3 weeks. And it was just like, Lord, if something, at my pregnancy with him, we had already lost 2 babies. And I just thought, if something happens to him, like, I'm not sure we're going to be okay. Like, this is so hard. What I wanted was just him to be in my arms safely. And like, that wasn't going to come at month 4, 5, 6. It wasn't going to come till the end. So just like, just that daily surrender of knowing that you're going to have to be in this place for a while. And sometimes that's where God does his best work, is when we have that very acute realization that we cannot do this on our own strength, like you guys were both saying. So I just say all the time, the only way through is through. And I'm really sorry that that's the case. I'm really sorry when it's involves so much pain. But that's just the reality. And it's really hard.
And such is the grace of community. I mean, because while we have to just kind of go through it, we don't have to do that alone. I mean, not only is God near to us, but he provides his body. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, is what do you do when you don't feel the real tangible presence of the body? So I know there's tension with that as well, but I think it's helpful to know, like, it is hard, and we also have each other. It's not perfect, but it's a grace. All right, so here's another question. Since we lost our daughter, I find myself marking time just before we can get pregnant again. Do you have any wisdom or insight in allowing enough time to grieve or being patient in waiting for your rainbow baby? I want to be... Hi, Andrew. Rainbow babies. I want to be wise and not just get pregnant again to try and soothe our loss, so we also really want living children. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say that personally, I think that if you're ready for rainbow baby, like, I think that's okay. As soon as you feel ready, and if the doctor, says it's okay to start trying again, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Pregnancies typically take 9 months. So even, if you get pregnant, that's still a lot of time to grieve the child that you lost. I don't think you have to feel like there has to be a mourning period before you can get pregnant again. I do think that getting pregnant with your rainbow baby provides this really sweet redemption. And while it can provide, or can cause some anxiety like we were just talking about, I think it is one way that the Lord provides really sweet things from a really broken experience of losing a child. This new baby will never replace the baby that you lost, but it really still, it just provides a lot of sweetness and a lot of beauty in an otherwise really hard story. So again, it won't remove your pain, but the same kind of applies what we were just talking about, moment by moment waiting, as you wait for this, as you wait either to get pregnant or then as you wait, as the pregnancy progresses. So, Holly, do you have anything to add? I definitely agree with what you said. I mean, it of course is a tension-filled place, because the anxiety is there and the excitement is there, and there's space for all of those emotions. And again, let's use both the hard and the good emotions to again just draw us into deeper just a deeper, more intimate prayer life, and deeper just fellowship and community with other believers who can come just surround us and cover us too with prayer and encouragement and practical help as we, as you journey through, what's next. And maybe that, it could be a really sweet time to become pregnant again, or it could be a really difficult time as you try to conceive and you struggle and you get pregnant again and you lose, and I'll probably let Kristin kind of speak into that. So that's it for me. Kristin, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of touched on this. It's okay to have those desires. I think sometimes we maybe tell ourselves, like, oh, it's selfish of me, or I should just be focusing on the baby I lost. And you're never going to forget that baby you lost. And those desires to have more children it's not a selfish desire. It's not like bad to want that. So I think that's just a good distinction to make. And I know that it's really hard to hold those desires with an open hand and to trust in God's timing, especially when maybe you feel as if you've trusted him with, the baby you lost and it ended very painfully. So my husband and I, we tried to have another child about 6 months after we lost Ethan. We were ready, or we felt ready. I think you kind of touched on this. I mean, the grief is not something that one day is just going to be, one day before the new heavens and the new earth. Like, it's not something that, we one day just won't have anymore. It'll change, and the intensity of it will soften, I think, over time. But we're rarely to a place where we're just completely over that and we're like, oh, I'm completely ready. But we, 6 months into it, or 6 months after losing Ethan, we felt as ready as we thought we'd ever be to have more children. And, as I mentioned, we lost that next baby we conceived. And so a few months later, we decided to try again. We lost that baby. That next time we waited almost a year, got pregnant again. We lost those twins. And I think that was really hard being in that season of waiting. I know we have another question, about how do you heal when there is no rainbow baby, and how do you deal with the pain and the reality of invisible motherhood? And I mean, there's so much I could say on that, but I think that first off, we hear you and we see you, and it's okay to lament and to be honest about those feelings. Again, it's not selfish to have those desires. In the waiting, it's okay to want that and to vocalize to the Lord that you want that and that it hurts to wait. I also think boundaries are okay. I think boundaries that come from a place of bitterness, that's a completely different thing. We really want to guard our hearts against bitterness, against those around us. But I also think it's okay to set up boundaries and to say, you know what, like, I can't really do baby showers right now, or I can't really, there's certain situations that for my heart, like, I can't really be in those. And I think that there's ways to do that where it's not coming from a root of bitterness. I think it can be wise to set up some healthy boundaries for yourself while you need to in that waiting. And I also think that something that really helped me in the waiting when I wanted a rainbow baby just so badly, and it, wasn't happening. And, there were almost 3 years between Ethan and Andrew. And in those 3 years, it took me a while before I realized this, but one day I felt like the Holy Spirit kind of laid on my heart that you can still be fruitful even if you're not being fruitful when it comes to children at this stage. So God has such a plan and a purpose for your life, and even in that waiting, he can use you to be fruitful. And I think I really wrestled with, like, why are we told to be fruitful and multiply and all these things about, being fruitful, and, I'm not doing those things and I want to do those things. And I think it was encouraging to me to see that, making disciples is one way that we can continue to be fruitful, even when, our lives may not look fruitful in the ways that we were hoping. And again, I know that's all sounds like so great to say. Those waiting years were really, really hard, and I just want to acknowledge that it's, it's okay to acknowledge that. And I think it's even okay to tell people around you. I had a few close friends that I just let know, like, hey, I'm really happy for you. I love you. I'm celebrating this baby with you right now. I just can't handle baby showers. They understood that. It was awkward conversations, and they knew. But I think, again, doing it with care and love and trying to really rid myself of any roots of bitterness, I think kind of helped have those conversations. So, awkward as they were at times, I think being able to just be honest about those feelings, was really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of moving into, I think we kind of covered most of the questions that we got as it pertains to pregnancy after loss and just the anxiety and just, just the struggle of, invisible motherhood. But we also got a lot of questions about just how how to gracefully interact with other people. In particular, I know one question we got multiple times was, what about when people are kind of insensitive or maybe aren't really validating or affirming of our pain, of our grief? How to extend grace while we're hurt in that place. And I know that Kristin and I, in particular, have talked a lot about this. We actually put out a podcast episode, one of our very first episodes, I think it was episode 3, called People Say the Darndest Things, because as we all know, if you are a lost mama in particular, people well-intentioned, there's grace there. We understand the intentions are good, but people can say some really hurtful things. And I think it comes from a good place, but, how can we respond gracefully, is a question that we got. And, I was just kind of thinking about this, and I think first we have to kind of get out at the root of what is it that is even beckoning us to need to respond gracefully. And if there's that tension there, it's because there's a hurt there. Mm-hmm. And I think, I was like, why is it so hurtful? Because I know for me, I feel like such a strong urge, as I know many of you listening do as well, just to be validated in my pain. Relating particularly just to my loss and grief journey. I just really want to be understood in that place. And it's as you know, it's an isolating place to be, even with the, it's a small kind of community that we are. So it's really isolating to be in this place. And so just that need to be validated, why is that such a need? And why does it hurt so much when people overlook or are dismissive, at least that it feels dismissive of our pain? And I think for me, I don't know if I can generalize this, but maybe Sarah and Kristin, if you agree, I think that when people don't validate our pain well, it feels dismissive to my child that I lost. It feels dismissive to the losses that I've had. It feels like it feels like the implication there is like, my lost children, didn't matter enough to make an impact enough on your life in order for you to really acknowledge my pain or respect my pain or approach me in that place. So I think that's really the root of it for me, and probably for a lot of us when we are struggling to extend grace to people who are, well-intentioned yet insensitive or just dismissive. And I think probably the most powerful thing we can do is take our eyes off of other people to fulfill that need. And again, this is hard to do, but hear me out, kind of I'm still learning to do this myself. If we can let Jesus, I know it's like Sunday school answer, let Jesus do it. But really, I'll give you a practical, I know I just referenced a book initially, but I'll give you another book. And we talk about Nancy Guthrie a lot on Through the Lens. She wrote an excellent book called Hearing Jesus Speak Into Your Sorrow. This book has really been my my lifeline through my grief journey, and I'd recommend it to. It's definitely not limited or necessarily specific to child loss, or really to anyone who's walking through something difficult. And I think that just that book for me really showed me and revealed to me how close truly Jesus is to the brokenhearted, because he went through all of these things himself. And I think about, I was thinking about God sending his son here on earth. And Jesus was despised and rejected by men and tortured and killed and spat upon and just all these horrible things. And to think that God himself had to watch his son go through all of that hurt, and just to think that and that grieved him so. And so I think when we're feeling lonely in that place and when we're feeling overlooked or dismissed, just to know that our God, he was there, he's been there, he's paved the way for us. Yeah. And I think that it doesn't help answer every question or heal every earthly hurt, but I think it points us to a greater restoration that someday will cover all of the earthly hurts. And again, I know that's difficult to do, but I think another practical way is just to, because I like I said earlier, I think that one of God's graces is through his people, through his church, his community. So I would say to find your people. If you are struggling to find people to process through this with, find them. And that may be hard to do. I know, like, Sarah, you're going to probably share in a little bit, like, for some of us, like, it kind of started online. And again, I know social media, bad rap, but with child loss in particular, like, it's hard to find people in your local community. Like, Sarah was the only one I knew locally that had lost, like, given birth to children and lost children. So it's difficult to do. But I would encourage you to, even if it's not someone who's walked a similar path, but to find your people who are going to be able to just sit with you and hear you out and hear your heart. And those people are out there. Again, they may not have been on the same loss journey, but I just pray over all of our lives that God will put people in our path that will encourage us, and that also that we can be an encouragement to. So yeah, I think that's it for me. Anything else?
Yeah. Kristin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I love everything you said, Holly. I think something I heard someone say once that really has been powerful for me is the idea of forgiving others before they even speak, and just knowing that people are going to say things that are going to hurt. We're going to say things to people that are going to hurt. I mean, just in our humanness, I think that's inevitable. And I think just knowing the grace that we've been given and giving that same grace, and also knowing that relationships will change, and that's okay. And again, we really want to be careful against bitterness. I'm not saying just angrily cut people out of your life, but my husband put it in perspective for me once. I was having a rough time with a few friendships that I felt like were just really shifting, and he kind of gently reminded me, like, you had friendships change, like, after we got married and after you went to college and after any big life thing, your friendships kind of shifted. And while it was kind of sad, it just didn't feel as personal, because it wasn't as sensitive of a reason for those friendships to change. But just knowing that sometimes that's okay. And again, I hesitate to say this because I don't want it to sound like, I want to also emphasize that some of my dearest, deepest friends are friends that we had really painful, awkward conversations with each other during this. They hurt me. I mean, I lashed out back. I mean, we had to work through a lot of this, and some of those friendships did survive this really difficult time. But I think just the idea of forgiving others before they speak, I think when I would go into things with that mindset, it was, it helped free me of some of the bitterness that I think was kind of brewing, deep down in my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I just want to add, like, when you lose a baby or walking through the season of loss, like, I think we all just don't know how to handle it. Even like within your own self, it's just such a hard thing. Like, you don't necessarily even know what you want or need all the time. And so just like realizing that's the umbrella, is it's all awkward, it's all uncomfortable, it's all painful for anyone who enters in. And then I guess a side note from that is, like, when I was walking through, which I feel like with Evie, it was just much harder. Everything was just really different than when it was with Charlie. And I probably only had 3 people that I felt like could hold, like, all the heaviness I would hand to them. Probably like 3 people. And maybe a couple others that were online that I found through, like, probably just found their blogs by Google searching.
Same.
That's kind of how it happens. Or what was it? Oh yeah, Facebook groups, like grief and loss groups. So you can still maintain friendships. They might not all be able to carry the weight that you want to be able to hand to them. And so if all of a sudden you find that your world shrinks really small, don't be surprised. It feels so hard. I feel like I always often felt like I'm the one grieving. Like, everyone should be catering to me. Everyone should take care of me. But the reality is, like, realize that what you're handing people is really heavy, and maybe not everyone can hold it. And so find the people, like Holly said, and like Kristin said, the people that can hold it and that are willing to carry it with you, and bring the things to them. And then, just like we said right at the beginning of this question, ultimately realizing that a human being will never be able to carry everything for you. Even if the simple fact, like, I need somebody and I text my friend and she doesn't text me back for 1 hour. Like, even something as simple as that is like, she can't be Jesus to you. She can't bring healing like the Lord can. And so just to realize that sometimes we need to sit in that uncomfortable place and pray it through with the Lord and wrestle. I know Kristin talked a lot about wrestling in the podcast we recorded a couple weeks ago. Like, sometimes the wrestling with the Lord and being face to face with him with these questions is where a lot of really sweet things happen in your relationship with him. So like, again, like none of it's easy. I wish we could hand you like a perfect little Band-Aid and a bow, but
well, I think too,
it's hard.
And maybe some of you are like me, where I am. Hello, I'm a podcast co-host. I'm a verbal processor. I like to talk things out, and I think more freshly off of my loss, in particular with Benjamin, since I really, that was a longer journey. I kind of wanted to talk to, not that I was like looking for answers from everybody, but I wanted to be able to like talk it out with everybody. And I was always so confused when people would, say a month or two after my loss would come up to me and say, hey, how are you? And I'd actually like start to tell them a little bit of like, hey, actually like this is what I'm struggling with today. And I think that would, I could tell that would kind of scare some people away, and they would like not really know how to respond, or they'd change the subject really quickly. And I just kind of made a mental note like, okay, I know you love me and I love you, but you're probably not my person right now. And that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Because not everybody can be our like people for those, in particular for those really hard seasons.
Well, I think even piggybacking off that, Holly, like Jesus had his disciples, like he loved everybody, and he, ministered. I mean, there was a lot of people that were in his like broader circle, or that he like, had meals with or did life with, but then his disciples were the ones who were like his core group. And I think that is a model for us of like, we don't have to be super deep with every single person in our life. Like we don't have to go there with everybody. We can be wise about who we share with, knowing that, some people love us, but they can't really be there for us in that way. And, as much as we want them to, and as much as like Sarah said, I mean, I've found myself in that place so many times of like, I'm the one grieving. You should all be catering to what I need because I'm hurting. And like, I'm the one who just went through this like really traumatic thing, and all of your life is like relatively easy right now in comparison to what I'm going through. And it becomes very much about me. But I think that, just knowing that it's like some people, like, well, all people, I mean, I think it just goes back to just knowing that Christ is the only one who's ever going to completely come through for us. And, people are going to let us down, just like we've let people down. It's part of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. Yeah. Oh, and then also, I guess I was going to add, Jesus had his 12 disciples, but then even still, he narrowed it down to 3 at some really important points.
Great point, Sarah.
In his life, like right before he died, for example. So, Okay, so we will move on. So, and still in the same vein of how do we deal with others during our grief, this question is, how do you deal with the pain when no one in your life acts like anything has changed? And I'm trying to comb through my own experience. I don't know that this was the case for me.
I don't know. I feel like it could relate more, particularly even to miscarriage, because there was no physical outside the womb.
Yeah.
Maybe. I met a girl this summer at a conference that I went to who said that she had a stillbirth and she was so surprised and hurt that nobody was bringing anything up, like her parents, her family, her siblings. And finally she just had to say, like, why aren't you guys even like saying his name? And they said, well, we thought it would upset you. And then as soon as she kind of broke the ice, she said it was like a complete 180-degree change. And they started talking about it and processing with her. So sometimes people might not know that you want to talk about it. And again, like we said, it feels like the onus should not be on us as the grieving ones to break the ice or to initiate that conversation. But sometimes if we can be brave and take that step, sometimes that's what it takes to open up a really beautiful, vulnerable relationship in our lives that can bring a lot of healing. So just encouragement there. If you feel like people are acting like they don't know how to respond, they're acting like nothing changed, maybe think about like how you're communicating about it and see if maybe there can be like a little bit of breaking the ice there to kind of open up some conversations. So, but again, I guess just reiterate what we said, like no person is going to be able to fulfill all your needs. So Holly, do you have something to add?
I think, agreement with you. And Kristin, how about for you? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think I think that's a great way to sum it up. I think we kind of touched on it, kind of just the giving grace and knowing that, no one person or no one really is going to fully satisfy and fill that gaping hole that we have, other than Christ. Sorry, my little guy is.
We like it. I think it's sweet.
But no, I think that is a great way to sum it up. And I think, like you mentioned, just being open with people. I think, vocalizing, like it is, a gift when you say his name or her name. It is a gift when we get to talk about it. I think a lot of times people don't realize that. And knowing that you may tell someone that and they may not take you up on it. It may not change anything, but for some people it might. And I think I know it is hard as the one who's grieving to feel like you need to do some of the work of, paving that road and meeting people in the middle. You want everybody just to come to you. And I get that. I've felt the same exact way. But I think that it is a powerful thing too, to be willing to just have some of those awkward conversations. I mean, I think of one of my best friends, like, we had some really painful conversations with, ways that, I was hurt and, it came out one day, like, they didn't know how to help me. And, now, it's like we're on the other side of that, and that friendship has gotten stronger. But had I continued to just shut down and not address it, I think that friendship probably would have died. And I think that though it's really hard to have those awkward conversations, sometimes they can be really healing.
Yes, agreed. Kristin, do you want to take us into the next section?
So another question we got that we want to address is, how can friends and family show support to those who've experienced pregnancy and infant loss? And there's so many things I can say, and I think I'll let both of you address this, but the big thing I think of is, like, to just show up and not be afraid to let them hurt. I think we're very quick to want to fix it. And I think knowing and acknowledging that you can't fix it is okay. I know that as a friend helping someone who's grieving, you would do anything in your power to take it away if you could, but the reality is that you can't. What you can, however, do is step in and help carry some of that burden, or help show up and be an encouragement and a comfort, but it's not on you to just take it from them. And I think a lot of times people want to, they want to take it and they can't. And I think just acknowledging that it hurts. I think I often felt like my grief wasn't valid when people tried very quickly to, like, give me, a quick word of encouragement that wasn't really encouraging. I think what I wanted more of the time was somebody just to say, I'm so sorry, and just to sit with me and just show up. And there's lots of little practical things people did. I think bringing meals was really helpful. Somebody came over and mowed our lawn. Just a lot of little things like that. But I would love to hear from both of you just some specific things people did that you think were really encouraging, or ways that friends and family can, show support.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Like, listening without a response, or like listening without like a fixing response. Like, listening to just say, like, I am so sorry. That sounds like, that's awful. Just kind of validating the feelings, really, and not like robotic, like, and how did you feel about that? Not like that, like, but a genuine, like, empathy and wanting to understand. So I think that's really huge. Validating their grief, not wanting to fix them, being okay to just, like, sit, not necessarily in silence, but sit in an awkward moment where they kind of just start, like, staring off, or just kind of trailing off of, like, they didn't even know how to finish that thought, and you're okay to just sit there and kind of let it be. I just think of my friends that did that for me, and it was like they would kind of just look at me and just keep nodding. And even, like, I don't even know why that's so powerful, but it really, really was. One of my friends one time after Evie passed away came over my house late at night and looked through our entire photo album with me, and, like, I got to talk about each picture. I'm gonna cry thinking, like, that is invaluable. Like, to share the details of my girl that, like, a handful of people only knew her, like, just huge. ask for details about the baby. Let them share details. Like, why did you pick that name? Oh, how did you pick that outfit? Like, even just little things like that, because we don't really get to talk about these babies that rocked our world, and we will literally never forget them. So that's just, it's so special.
What a gift.
So really practically speaking, like meals were always huge. Like I love to eat. And so just having like food available was really big. And then also just options, because like initially after my losses, like my appetite was so weird.
Oh yeah.
And just like having options, even like, oh gosh, I went through a phase where like all I could eat were like Frosties and like smoothies. Like I didn't even want to chew, which sounds so dumb, but that was what I went through. I had two friends who had arranged coffee dates for us, and also had childcare at the same time. Like their husbands would watch, because I guess I'm the only one of the three of us who had one like normal pregnancy. So I always had Micah. And so they would make sure that we had a coffee date, but then like they also took it upon them to arrange childcare, which just was so nice. Let's see what else. Yeah, oh, and also, like, I might be the opposite of Holly. I'm a super internal processor, pretty introverted, and I think I do need and appreciate space. And so if you have a friend like that, just being okay to give them that space and not taking offense to it, and knowing that's what she needs to heal. And, like, I loved check-in texts, like, a lot, because if I wanted to go a little deeper, I could and open up that door. But otherwise, like, maybe space is my love language. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible. So, yeah, that was for me. How about you?
Yeah, well, and that's just so interesting to hear you say, like, space was so important for you.
Yeah.
I think even just going back to the miscarriage we experienced, which was, like, the first of the hard things that we'd walked through. And I think people initially thought we wanted space. And I know even people were saying, oh, give them space, give them time. And meanwhile, and I didn't realize that that was kind of being passed around, which I understand why, because I guess people actually do exist.
Some people
like
are
that.
weird and they need space.
But meanwhile, you know, I'm post miscarriage, I'm checking my phone, like where is everyone? Does anyone care? And so for me, I'm like, I needed to hear from people, and I needed, I just kind of needed that support in that way. And I've realized as I'm like giving tips on how to support grieving people that I was like so terrible at this before having walked this loss journey myself.
Right.
I feel like I was like the worst offender in that I was, I can't think of like a particular instance, but I'm sure that I fell under the silence is deafening camp, where I just like would never even, I would just like pretend like whatever it was like didn't happen because I wouldn't know what to say, and I didn't want to upset the person. I didn't want to bring it up. And it wasn't until I walked through it myself that I realized like, oh, like that person is always thinking about it. Like you're not gonna like bring it up when they like had just forgotten. Like
you're not gonna remind them.
It's
you're not gonna remind them.
So I think that's been probably the biggest thing for me. And again, I know everyone, and you know, some people again need space in a different way. But I think, like you were even saying, like even you liked still like check in text, even if you didn't necessarily want to respond. But I really do think for me, and probably for many people, I can speak for that silence really is deafening. So I've kind of learned, you know, even if you don't even know the person that well, it truly, I don't think it can hurt to send a card in the mail. I know a big thing for us, it sounds so like simple, but we felt so encouraged when we had like snail mail come to our house or to the hospital we were at up in Philadelphia, when we'd come in after a long day at the ICU, and we'd get back to the Ronald McDonald House, and we'd have like, it seemed like almost every other day we'd have a care package waiting for us. And that was so, to be honest, it was extremely humbling for me, because Billy and I both, we'd be like, we feel so loved and so supported, even though we're broken right now. Like we feel so lifted up spiritually by community. We never would have done this for people. We wouldn't have even thought about it. So I think that was huge for us, just so humbling, just to be like, man, we want to do this for people. And so that kind of changed us big time. So yeah, I think it's always worth, whether it's a card or a care package, or like you guys are saying, meals, whatever, just to, I think doing something is probably better than, just trying to either remain silent or do a quick quip of just something to try and cheer the person up. I really am like super averse to people trying to cheer me up when I just want to lament. And I think that, I look to just scripture and just biblical examples of I like to call it holy lament, because there's so many examples, in particular in the Old Testament. We think of Job and David, just crying out, like, how long, oh Lord, will you hide your face? And like, man, if David, a man after God's own heart, can say that, like, can we be encouraged to say, Jesus himself, on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? If our own Christ can say that to the Father, like that, not only does it make it just okay, I think it actually, I dare say it encourages us to bare our hearts before one another and before the Lord, just in our hurt. So, just not cheering. I think for me, just not cheering people up. If you're going to send a verse, for me at least, I didn't really love getting sent verses that were like trying to work together for better. Because you know why? I think because I was thinking, why did that grate on me so much? And it still does in many ways. And I think it's that it kind of, the implication there, and I know this isn't the intention, but it kind of makes it seem like the person sending those verses are kind of like saying like, hey, this is in the Bible, you need to learn this. Like, this is clearly something you don't know, so I'm going to tell you this first so that you can learn this and that you can feel better. So
and you're not doing it right.
Yeah. If you were doing it right, you wouldn't feel this way. So
sure. It's like, I know that's in the Bible.
Enough, you would know this.
Right. It's like, it's there, but I don't want to go there right now. I just want to sit in the, the heartache of David and anyway. So
yeah, and I think that's appropriate when you've gone through the level of loss of a child.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess last kind of segment type of questions that we got is just how to, it kind of falls in line with just how to support one another, but in particular, how to support people in the church, particularly in the church who, have experienced loss, whether it be pregnancy loss or infant or child loss, but outside the confines of marriage. So maybe someone who's in the church body, who I guess like the scenario would be like someone was pregnant and then lost a baby, but they weren't married. And then I guess I hate that some people got this response that I guess people were telling them like, well, it was better this way because they weren't married.
Yeah, when the question came through, I was like, oh, or like the implication was, well, maybe it was better. It worked out this way.
Yeah. So Sarah, I'll let you take over because that's just like, I'm angry even just that was said. So
yeah, when I read that question, I just thought like my gut reaction is like, first of all, the church's response to the loss of a life should never be, well, it was better this way. Whether that child was conceived in or out of wedlock doesn't negate the value of that child or that little life. So I'm just so sorry that the implication was that it was better this way, because that isn't, I don't believe, the way the Lord would actually see it. I don't believe that. I guess moving on from there is, I would say the way to support a young woman who is not married, who lost a baby, would be just similar to what we were saying. Validate her grief. I think both Holly and Kristin and I think all of us said, when a woman loses a baby, she wants to know that her grief is valid and that her baby's life mattered. And this baby, their life mattered. God created this little soul. And so it doesn't matter whether this baby was conceived in a holy marriage for the baby to have value. So this little life is worthy of grieving, and the mother's grief is very valid. So if you can just come around her and support her in the same way that you'd support, a married woman, meals, take her out to coffee, check in on her. I don't know, she likes edible arrangements, send her some chocolate-covered strawberries, like just anything to say.
Chocolate's always
the
right answer. When in doubt, chocolate. Yeah.
Just to say, I see you, I hear you, you are valuable to me, and you are valuable to God, and your story and your pain matters to Him. I think any way that you can communicate that to her is just the right thing to do. So, I don't know, Kristin, if you have anything.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Sarah. I mean, I don't think we should ever say that a life doesn't matter, and no matter what circumstances led to a child's conception, I mean, that child is created in the image of God, and I think any life is worth celebrating and or grieving. And, you know, I think also, I mean, God is a God of redemption, and he works all things together for good, you know, for his children, and even things that, you know, maybe were born out of sin, or were born, I mean, things that came out of something that maybe wasn't a wise decision, or, I mean, none of that matters, because God can take that and redeem it. And I think all that aside, I think that should not be our focus. I think that, you know, life should be celebrated and grieved, and I would say to support that woman just as you would support any woman who's lost a baby. And I cringed as well as at the question, because I'm just so sorry, like, on behalf of the church, that is something that somebody said to you. For anybody who's been made to feel that way, I am so sorry. That is not what Jesus would have said to you if he was sitting across from you. No. Jesus would have wrapped his arms around you and just, I mean, loved you in that. He would not have said that to you. And I just hope that we can remember that when people in the church say hurtful things, let that not be a reflection on the heart of Christ, and, you know, let that not taint our view of him, because that is absolutely just counter to what his response would have been.
Yeah.
I even think for, you know, the three of us, like, all the children that we birthed and lost all had special needs, and you know, I think it's easy, well, not easy, but sometimes it happens that, you know, when a special needs child is lost, that, people can kind of look at, oh, it was better this way. They would have had a hard life.
Heard that.
Same. Yeah. And it's like, that's not for us to decide, you know, so.
Right. All life has value, whether or not it looks like the typically developing person.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been so good. We're going to start wrapping up here, and I thought maybe a great way to end, because I am assuming that a lot of people tuning in tonight are kind of deep in the thick of their grief, and so I would just love to end on a note of hope and just give a little, I guess, a little snapshot into what grief looks like a little bit further removed. I think when you're in the middle of it, you want it to be over, and understandably so, because it's just the worst. But if we can offer some hope, just being as far removed as each one of us are, just offer some hope. So, Holly, do you want to go ahead and just let us know, how would you describe your grief on this side of your losses?
Yeah, so I think my grief on this side, and again, I'm about 3 years, a little over 3 years post loss of Benjamin. And I would honestly say that I feel like my grief, if I could define it, it kind of feels like this holy grief. And I don't mean holy in the sense that it feels like this big worshipful event all the time. But I feel like there's just this dichotomy where it just feels very kind of sacred and set apart, such that I feel like there's this big part of me that born out of, like, the bitter fruit, as John Piper calls it, that has been born out of this lost journey, is that I am so deeply connected to heaven in a way that there's no way I would ever be if I didn't, if I hadn't have walked this path of loss and having a child, and really children, miscarriage as well of twins. So three souls in heaven that I carried in my body. So I feel like just I have just living into that just encouragement of just the joy that I know is waiting for me on the other side of this life, which is so short. And I feel like at the same time, there's just this like holy like groaning and longing inside of me. And I think about in Romans when we're told that, all of creation just groans in anticipation for just the future redemption and restoration that is to come. And it's like, we're here, we're in this like broken world, and we know what's waiting for us, but we're still here and we're not there yet. And so I feel that tension there. And I think in particular for me, where I've kind of settled in my grief journey, I'll just be completely honest of where I still struggle. And I think I'll continue to struggle, really. I don't think I'll ever fully be able to reconcile. I know none of us will, but I think in particular, my struggle is that not even as much, not even so much that Benjamin has physically died, but I think it's my struggle right now and always has been more in the life that he lived here on this earth. He lived for 10 weeks on this earth, and it was a very hard 10 weeks, and we saw him suffer every day, and that was it's just those painful memories are still there, and it's like, God, like if he was gonna die anyway, like why did it have to be so painful for so long? And I know there are many women, it's 10 weeks for us. I know there are many mamas out there who have had longer journeys. So I see that and I respect that. But yeah, that's kind of that part of me that's just like groaning for this redemption. But ultimately it's just an encouragement to those of us who are in that place of groaning that, we get to keep our eyes fixed on the hope of heaven. And that's why, really why Kristin and I, we decided to name our podcast Through the Lens. We want to really look at these things through the lens of the gospel. And really the gospel is the blood of Christ, which allows us to be reunited with the Father and with our lost children for eternity. So that's just really exciting. And, we got to keep our eyes there. We have to keep our eyes set there because the enemy and just the pull of this world don't want us to have our eyes gazing upon just the future hope and redemption that is to come. So I think we just need to really be reminding one another and just praying that the Holy Spirit would remind us that it is coming, and it's coming quickly too. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a long ways away, but every day really does get us closer to that place of redemption. So
I feel like Paul says that a lot. Paul says that a lot. He says, encourage one another with these words.
That's good.
Like,
yeah.
Like you basically just said the Bible right now.
Hey. That was free for coming tonight, y'all.
All right, Kristin, how about you? How do you describe what your grief is like on this side of your losses?
Yeah, I think when we're going through it, it's really easy to feel like it's just never, like the fog's never going to lift, and you're never going to, like I remember the first time I laughed after Ethan died, and it was very shocking and almost jarring to me. Because it had been so long, and I can vividly remember where I was standing, what I was doing that first time, and I remember it almost felt scary to feel joy. It felt scary to laugh. It felt scary to feel those emotions, even though they were the emotion you don't want to feel the pain, but then I think stepping out of it almost feels scary. And I think as time goes on, I think of it like waves in the ocean. If there's a storm or something, in the beginning, it's going to just be constant waves and just constantly feeling you're being pulled under. And then as time passes, there's still waves in the ocean that come, but they're spread out more. And I think at this point in our grief, the waves still come, and I think that's okay. They're less intense and they're less frequent. And I think that it's an encouragement to know that the intensity is not always going to be that same way. And I think that it has been such a gift to be able to wrestle with God and to, deepen our relationship in that way. And I think that, it's such a gift is the best word I can think of. And it was a hard gift and a painful gift. And, but I think coming out on the other side of that relationship, just being able to not only have that closer relationship with the Lord, but also I think having, open eyes to the suffering in the world and to what a treasure the gospel is in light of that. And I think that is such an encouragement. But I think on top of what the just great insight both of you have already offered, I think the big thing I would say is that it won't always look this way. And I think that is an encouragement to know that 3 years later, whereas I thought I would never smile or laugh again, I'm able to do those things. I'm able to enjoy things. It doesn't mean that I don't miss my son. It doesn't mean that I'm not that there's not grief there, but it looks very different. And I think that when we're in the fog, it's really hard to envision a day where you ever would want to get out of bed. And I think it's just encouraging to know that, that those days are coming.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And talking about, Kristin, when you just talked about remembering the first time that you laughed after Ethan, I remember, because for both of our children that we lost, we found out at 20 weeks that they were not going to survive, the same as you did with Ethan, Kristin. And so, diagnosis day for Evie was July. She was born in November. And then I remember it was like a couple days before New Year's Eve. And I thought, I didn't cry today. It was like the first day I hadn't cried in months. And it was like, that's new. And maybe it'll be a little uphill from there. And of course, there's so many ups and downs with grief. But I remember having that distinct moment too, like, what is that, 5 months? And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I didn't actually cry today. Okay, well, yeah, it's like it's very distinct in my mind. But I guess if I were to describe what my grief is like right now, 6 years removed from Evie passing and 3 from Charlie, I really feel like what the Lord has given me now is just this, it's all been channeled to give purpose to you, to everyone else who's hurting, to use my experience and what the Lord has brought me through for good, and to encourage other women and men too, moms and dads who have lost babies. I just really feel like that is where I am. After Charlie passed away, I was so impressed upon me, Matthew 25, where the master gives his servants talents. He gives them money, and 2 of them invest it well, and he says, well done. And the 3rd one, he buries it because he's so afraid of what to do with it. And my prayer after Charlie passed away was, Lord, like, you put this in my life twice. Don't let me bury it. Like, what am I supposed to do with it? And so I feel like, here I am. Here is part of what I'm supposed to do with my grief. And so this is what it looks like for me today. But just encouragement that it will change. It will get better, and it will not always feel so heavy and so all-consuming. So just thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to Kristin for calling in, for coming right after work. Thank you so much. And for Holly for driving across town to come to my house. It's been great. I'm just so thankful for you guys and the relationship that we have, and thankful for the community that we can reach, and for the Lord who just gives us these things to share. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
All right, Kristin, we're going to hang up on you right now.
Oh, hold on. Are we
hang on, here, let me.
Okay.
I'll just
okay. All right, actually, yeah.
All right, bye, live people.
First time doing a live, clearly.
Well, friends, I hope that episode was really encouraging to your heart, especially if you find yourself in a place of grief and loss right now. I just hope that what we shared is able to encourage you in your journey and point you to Jesus, and also validate just the pain that we know that you're going through. And so I just hope that we are able to encourage your heart today. A big thank you to Holly and Kristin for partnering with me again. It was just super fun. I hope we can do it in the future. It's one of my dream goals, so look out, you guys. I'm coming back for you. If you don't follow Through the Lens podcast on Instagram, or if you aren't subscribed to their show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, I would highly recommend it, again, especially if you're going through any season of suffering, not just infant loss related, but they just work through a lot of big questions that we all face when it comes to grief and suffering, and how that fits into our understanding of God as a good God. And so I just highly recommend it if you're kind of wrestling through those questions with something difficult in your life right now. Well, we only have, I guess, just really a couple days left in the month of October to focus on pregnancy and infant loss. But if you go over to my Instagram, that's Sarah_Rieke, Rieke. I've been trying to post really intentional content for infant loss moms, especially my Insta stories, Arm in Arm, 31 Days of Solidarity for Infant Loss Mamas. And it's really just quotes from books, from blog posts, from women that I know and love, or whose resources I know and love, to just encourage you in your season of grief, just to make you feel less alone. So I hope you find encouragement there. I'll continue to post throughout until the month is over. Well, this is the last podcast episode for October, and so it is the last installment of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Heart Focus. Starting in November, our heart focus is going to be thankfulness in all seasons. And I have some really incredible guests lined up. Actually, a good couple of repeat guests. So I'm so excited that friends of the show wanted to come back to share more of their story and speak more on this topic of thankfulness in all seasons. We're going to kick off the month of October with a special lighthearted episode with Haley Morgan, who came on to talk about her newest book, Preach to Yourself. And so we are going to kick off November on Friday. We are going to share that episode with you. And I have not done a lighthearted episode in forever. And they're super fun if you aren't familiar with what they are. It's basically just fun questions, like super fun stuff like, how many cups of coffee did you have this morning? What's a hairstyle that you've ever had that you regret? If you have $100 in your pocket, where are you going to go spend it? Just really fun things like that. So tune in to hear that from Haley on Friday, our conversation. It was really fun. All right, friends. Well, that is all from me for today. Thank you so much for listening, for staying connected. Make sure that you find Holly and Kristin. They are on Instagram at Through the Lens Podcast. And so I hope that you will just go over and give them some love and just tell them how much you enjoyed this episode, and definitely follow along with them. Actually, it's funny. I just got a text from Holly. So that's the text tone that you just heard. Oh, that's too funny. Okay, guys. Well, yeah, that's all for me for today. Go over and follow those girls. Tell them how much you loved hearing from them. And again, they're just great to follow. Okay, well, as always, I hope that you found this episode to be inspiring and encouraging to help you walk well in the story that God has written especially for you. Bye, guys.